They say history is written by the victors, but sometimes the victors are merely the last ones allowed to speak, while far older voices are quietly pushed into silence. Beneath layers of curated narratives and selective memory, but some history was erased by someone else entirely, not by conquerors with swords and banners, but by unknown hands with pens, archives, and the authority to decide what the world is permitted to know. A Sumerian tablet found in 1901 described beings descending in fire, a phrase so vivid and specific that early translators struggled to decide whether it was metaphor, myth, or an eyewitness account recorded in the only language available to its ancient author. The translation was quietly buried for decades, shuffled through committees, and reclassified under innocuous titles, until it vanished into a bureaucratic labyrinth where inconvenient findings go to be forgotten. Why? Because the beings were named Anunnaki, identified not as distant mythic figures, but as active participants in humanity's earliest chapters, described with a level of detail that made the translators deeply uncomfortable. The gods who shaped mankind from clay, a line that has been repeated endlessly in textbooks, museum plaques, and scholarly debates because it is simple, harmless, and fits neatly within the expected framework of myth, except the lines don't say clay. Not in the untouched transcription, not in the preserved fragments, and certainly not in the hurried copy made by a junior archivist, who sensed the document might not survive long. They say blood of the gods, a phrase so provocative, so disruptive to accepted history, that it was immediately replaced with a safer, softer, more symbolic interpretation that would raise fewer questions. Who edits ancient translations and why, and what kind of power or fear must be involved for scholars to agree, unanimously and wordlessly, that the world should not see the unaltered text? And why is this tablet missing from major museums, institutions that claim neutrality and preservation, yet refuse to acknowledge the existence of an artifact photographed, catalogued, and reported by the very team that excavated it? One fragment remains, locked in a private collection, stored in a temperature-controlled vault whose owner refuses academic access, while quietly purchasing any related fragments that appear on the market. What truth were we never meant to read? And why does a single stone, scorched and ancient, inspire such determined secrecy across so many institutions that should have no reason to hide anything at all? Humans farmed, hunted, and wandered for hundreds of thousands of years, moving through the world with slow, organic adaptation, shaping tools and traditions at a pace that mirrored the long, patient rhythms of nature itself. Then within one generation summer erupted into cities, math, law, and astronomy, a transformation so abrupt and sophisticated that even modern researchers struggle to explain. How a society with no precedent or prototypes could generate a fully developed civilization, almost overnight. No slow evolution, no gradual steps, just an unprecedented surge of organized complexity, as if someone had placed blueprints in their hands and instructed them to build a world far beyond anything they had known. Just instant knowledge appearing in their language, architecture, and governance with a precision that should have required centuries of trial, error, and refinement. Sumerians claimed they didn't invent anything, insisting repeatedly that the arts of writing, agriculture, law, medicine, and astronomy were not their creations, but gifts bestowed upon them by beings far older and wiser. They said they were taught, trained directly by celestial visitors who descended from the sky and shared information no human culture had the means to discover independently, taught by sky beings with wings of fire, described not as spirits or metaphors, but as physical presences, whose arrival was recorded with the same matter-of-fact tone used for kings, storms, and harvests, who mapped the stars with impossible precision, charting planetary orbits and celestial cycles that would not be rediscovered by human scientists until millennia later with the aid of telescopes and advanced mathematics. Why did they say this so casually? Why did they pass these statements down through generations as accepted history rather than myth, offering no elaborate symbolism or poetic disguise? Why do historians ignore it? Why do they dismiss these accounts as mere stories when the data encoded within them frequently aligns with modern astronomical knowledge the Sumerians could not have accessed? And how did they know planets we didn't discover until modern telescopes? How did they describe celestial bodies invisible to the naked eye with accuracy that still astonishes scholars today? Unless someone really did teach them, someone whose presence was recorded not as legend, but as memory, a memory the modern world has chosen, perhaps deliberately, to forget. Human DNA has a strange anomaly, a sudden, surgically precise fusion event in our chromosomes that appears not as a gentle mutation shaped by time, but as a clean, deliberate alteration that no known natural mechanism can fully account for, an edit so abrupt that it stands out like a signature etched into our genetic code. A sudden fusion event no natural process accounts for, one that seems to occur not gradually across populations, but instantly, as though the blueprint of the human species was rewritten in a single generational heartbeat, rather than shaped through slow evolutionary drift. Some geneticists call it an engineered signature, a term whispered in academic hallways, spoken cautiously in papers that tiptoe round implications, as if even acknowledging the possibility of intelligent intervention challenges the foundations of modern science. Ancient tablets call it the gift of the Anunnaki, describing a moment when beings from the sky mingled their essence with early humans, reshaping the destiny of our species with an act portrayed not as mythic creation, but as technological transformation, a rewriting of human destiny, where the shift from primitive hominids to self-aware, complex-thinking humans is not depicted as gradual awakening, but as a decisive upgrade delivered by visitors who saw potential in a fledgling species. Science says we evolved slowly, mapping timelines of fossils and migrations that span millions of years, building a picture of steady adaptation yet still unable to explain why the final leap to modern intelligence occurred so suddenly and uniformly. But the Sumerians say we were upgraded, crafted, refined, and elevated by beings whose knowledge surpassed anything imaginable at the dawn of civilization. Beings who were remembered not as gods in distant metaphor, but as engineers of life. Why do myths from continents apart share the same story? Why do cultures separated by oceans, mountains, and millennia described the arrival of luminous sky beings who shaped humanity, taught laws, bestowed knowledge, and then retreated into the heavens. Sky gods arrive, gives, create, humans gives, disappear. A pattern repeated with uncanny consistency in legends from Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Andes, Oceania, and the First Nations of North America, as though each culture preserved a chapter of the same forgotten event. Why the same pattern everywhere? Why the recurring claim that humanity's origin involved outside intervention, delivered suddenly and purposefully, instead of slow, isolated development? Either a global coincidence, a strange alignment of imagination across tens of thousands of miles, cultures and eras, or a global intervention, a coordinated event remembered in fragments across civilizations, preserved as myth only because ancient people lacked the vocabulary to describe what they witnessed. The Sumerians charted planets we didn't know existed, mapping the solar system with such precision that modern astronomers still marvel at how a Bronze Age culture identified bodies, invisible to the naked eye, and described their motions with disarming confidence. But they also drew one more, a wandering world beyond the known planets, depicted not as symbolic art, but as a distinctly placed celestial object with its own orbital path and astronomical characteristics. A hidden world they called Nibiru, a term woven into their cosmology as the crossing place, the homeworld or stronghold of the sky beings who descended to Earth during humanity's earliest dawn. A place the Anunnaki used as their home, described with details of atmosphere, terrain, and purpose, as if the scribes were recording knowledge passed down from direct encounters, rather than fabricating legends from imagination. And they described its orbit with shocking detail, detailing a path so elongated and so mathematically specific that, when compared to theoretical models of long-period celestial bodies, it aligns in ways that are difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Even NASA admitted their math is curiously accurate, a carefully measured phrase that acknowledges the anomaly, while avoiding the uncomfortable question of how ancient astronomers, lacking telescopes and modern instruments, could have calculated such movement at all. How did a Bronze Age society know celestial mechanics? How did a people at the dawn of metallurgy produce calculations that mirror the work of modern astrophysics, unless they were taught by someone who possessed that knowledge firsthand? Who taught them the movement of planets? Who explained orbital periods, inclinations, and cycles so complex that most civilizations wouldn't rediscover similar concepts until thousands of years later? Why does every culture have a home of the gods in the sky, a distant realm, a star world, a celestial homeland described not metaphorically, but geographically, as if ancient humans were trying to preserve details of places they themselves could never visit? A myth or a memory? A symbolic story crafted by early imaginations, or a fading recollection of real encounters? Distorted by time, but too consistent across the globe to dismiss entirely? We laugh at the idea today, comfortable in our modern assumptions, confident in our scientific worldview, certain that our ancestors mistook stars for fantasies. But ancient people wrote it like absolute fact, with the calm certainty of those recording events they believed were real, leaving behind tablets, carvings, and star maps that suggest a story far stranger and perhaps far older than the one we've allowed ourselves to consider. In the 1800s, newspapers reported giant skeletons across North America, printing sensational yet meticulously described accounts of burial mounds, yielding skeletal remains so massive and unusual that even seasoned archaeologists of the era struggled to categorize them within known human history. 10 feet tall, with proportions suggesting strength far beyond any recorded population, as if they belonged to a forgotten species or a lineage deliberately omitted from the chapters of our accepted past. Double rows of teeth, a biological anomaly rarely seen today, noted repeatedly in articles by independent journalists, local doctors, and curious citizens who examined the remains before officials arrived to claim them. Strange skull shapes, elongated craniums, heavy brow ridges, and peculiar bone structures that did not match any indigenous group, prompting early researchers to speculate about an ancient race, predating current civilizations by untold centuries. Every story vanished without explanation, quietly removed from archives, clipped from newspapers, or dismissed as misunderstandings despite the sheer volume of consistent reports published across multiple states over several decades. Smithsonian employees denied everything, issuing official statements that no such skeletons were ever catalogued, even though eyewitnesses swore they watched Smithsonian agents load crates filled with bones onto wagons that disappeared into federal storage. Yet eyewitnesses insisted the bones were real, describing their size, shape, and distinct anomalies with such clarity and uniformity that their testimonies form a mosaic too coherent to dismiss as mere fantasy or collective exaggeration. Sumerians described the Anunnaki as giant kings, towering rulers who descended from the heavens and governed humanity in the ages before the flood. Beings whose size and power were so immense that they inspired both reverence and fear. Rulers of the earth before the flood, commanding cities, shaping bloodlines, and walking among early humans as overlords whose presence shaped the myths that echoed through later civilizations on every continent. Are these skeletons evidence of them? Are they the physical remnants of those pre-flood beings' forgotten kings, whose existence would rewrite the story of humanity as origins, if ever acknowledged openly, or just another mystery conveniently erased? Another uncomfortable piece of the puzzle removed by institutions that prefer a clean, controlled timeline to one that includes giants, forgotten species, or visitors from the stars? Why do giant legends appear in every culture, from Native American stone-coat giants to the Nephilim of the Hebrew texts, to the massive titans of Greece, to the towering demigods of Polynesia? How did every civilization invent the same beings, independently, unless they weren't inventions at all? Nearly every civilization speaks of a great flood, a cataclysm so powerful and so devastating that its memory rippled across millennia, preserved in stories carved into tablets, whispered through oral traditions, and embedded within the earliest written histories of humankind. But the Sumerian version is the oldest, etched into clay long before biblical writers, Vedic poets, or ancient scribes gave their own names to the disaster, making it the foundational account upon which all later flood legends appear to be built. It claims the Anunnaki started it, portraying the deluge not as an accident of nature or wrath of a singular god, but as a deliberate and calculated decision by powerful beings overseeing humanity's development. A reset button for humanity, a sweeping erasure meant to wipe clean a civilization that had grown, in the eyes of its overseers, to chaotic, to unpredictable, and too difficult to control. Because humans became too loud. A Sumerian phrase interpreted by scholars as meaning to populace, too advanced, or perhaps to mentally awaken, suggesting that humanity's growth exceeded the boundaries set by their creators, too rebellious, challenging authority, expanding knowledge, and forging identities that no longer fit the roles assigned to them by the sky beings who once guided every aspect of early civilization, to awakening to truths, technologies, or freedoms that may have threatened those who positioned themselves as divine rulers over the ancient world. But one Anunnaki warned a human to build a vessel, a quiet act of defiance that preserved a single family and the genetic continuity of humanity, mirroring the latest story of Noah, Deucalion, Utnapishtim, Manu, and countless others. The same story appears in the Bible, India, and indigenous legends, different languages, different landscapes, yet nearly identical sequences, a warning, a chosen survivor, a vast flood, and a rebirth of humanity in the aftermath of destruction. Different names, same plot, as though all these accounts are fractured memories of one real event witnessed by ancestors, scattered across the world. Did all humans share one ancient disaster? A singular global catastrophe so profound that it became the backbone of mythologies everywhere, passed down through time as both a warning and a reminder. And who were the beings deciding who lived and died? Who held the authority to reshape an entire species, determine its fate, and intervene in its evolution? And why did they choose to step back into the sky once their judgment was complete? The Sumerian king list is one of archaeology's strangest documents, a polished, deliberate record carved into clay with such confidence and precision that scholars still argue over how a text so ancient could be so detailed, so structured, and so unnervingly bold in its claims. It lists kings who ruled for 10,000 years, reigning for spans of time so impossibly vast that they stretch beyond the boundaries of biology, logic, and every known human civilization, yet the scribes recorded them without hesitation, as if these lifespans were widely accepted facts. Historians call it myth, a convenient label used to quarantine anything that doesn't fit neatly into our predetermined understanding of history, even though the same document accurately lists real cities, real dynasties, and real kings from later eras. But everything else in the document is historically accurate, from place names to political successions, indicating that the scribes knew exactly what they were recording and that they drew no distinction between the mythic early kings and the verified rulers who came after. So why lie about the timelines? Why include impossible reign lengths in a document that otherwise strives for exactness, unless those durations were not meant to be symbolic at all, but reflective of beings who did not live by human limitations? Or was life longer for someone not entirely human? For a race whose biology, technology, or origins allowed them to endure for millennia? ruling over early humans with lifespans that would appear godlike. Compared to the brief existence of ordinary mortals, the list says these rulers were the Anunnaki themselves, described as kings who descended from the sky, took command of regions, established cities, and governed humanity not as distant deities, but as present, physical rulers walking among their creations. And after the flood, lifespans dropped drastically, a sudden and dramatic reduction, recorded in the same document, as though something fundamental changed either in humanity or in the relationship between humans and those who once ruled them, exactly like the Bible's genealogy, where patriarchs before the flood live for hundreds of years, only for their descendants to experience rapidly shortening lifespans. Once the deluge reshapes the world, to cultures, same pattern. Two civilizations separated by geography and time, yet telling precisely the same story. A long-lived race before the flood, a great cataclysm, and a much shorter human life afterward. Myth or forgotten history, a shared echo of something real, preserved through different languages and traditions, yet dismissed simply because it challenges the limits of what modern scholars are comfortable acknowledging. Why does no one want to touch this? Why is the king list treated with selective acceptance, embracing its accuracy where convenient, and rejecting it entirely when it threatens the tidy boundaries of our historical timeline? 8. The Forbidden Library of Nineveh in 1850. Archaeologists uncovered 30,000 tablets, a vast library buried beneath the sands of Nineveh, containing the earliest known writing of humanity, an archive so immense, so ancient, and so shockingly advanced that it rewrote everything scholars thought they knew about the ancient world, the oldest writing in human history, etched with knowledge that seemed far too sophisticated for a Bronze Age civilization, as if the scribes were recording traditions passed down from a source far older than summer itself. Most were about the Anunnaki, detailing their roles, their cities, their hierarchy, and their interactions with humanity not as mythic spirits, but as rulers, teachers, scientists, and beings whose presence shaped early civilization, creation, astronomy, medicine. Subjects explained with such depth that some tablets describe surgical procedures, astronomical cycles, and cosmological structures that modern science rediscovered only thousands of years later. But the most controversial tablets were never published, their translations withheld, their contents quietly classified, their existence acknowledged only in whispers among certain scholars, who hinted at material too disruptive for public release. A rumor says they describe an ancient war, a conflict that raged not on Earth, but in the sky above it, between the Anunnaki and another powerful race. A cosmic struggle that spilled into our world and left scars in the memory of early humans. Between the Anunnaki and another sky race, a rival civilization described as equally advanced, equally formidable, and capable of unleashing devastation so immense that ancient scribes struggled to describe it in any earthly language. Explosions like suns, bursts of unimaginable light and heat, witnessed by terrified humans who wrote of the sky splitting open, of mountains trembling, of a brightness that turned night into blinding day, weapons that turned stone to dust, devices so destructive that rock disintegrated cities vaporized, and landscapes were scarred in ways that sound disturbingly similar to the aftereffects of modern nuclear detonations. Why does this sound like nuclear imagery? Why do descriptions from 4,000 years ago resemble the language used by scientists in the 20th century? Despite the impossibility of such knowledge in the ancient world, why does half the libraries stay locked away? Why are certain tablets restricted, unpublished, or quietly archived? As though someone decided humanity is not yet prepared to confront what those texts actually reveal. What are we not allowed to learn? What truth lies sealed in those forgotten chambers' truth that could challenge our understanding of history, origins, and the forces that shaped humanity's earliest ages? The Baghdad Battery, a small clay jar with copper and iron components that, when filled with an acidic liquid, produces an electric charge and artifacts so anomalous that even today's engineers admit it, resembles a device thousands of years ahead of its time, the Antikythera mechanism, a complex arrangement of precision gears capable of predicting eclipses, tracking celestial movements, and modeling astronomical cycles with an accuracy not seen again until medieval clockwork. Yet pulled from a shipwreck dated to the ancient Greek world, the vitrified fortresses of Scotland, stone walls melted as if exposed to temperatures found only in industrial furnaces or modern weapons, leaving researchers baffled as to how ancient peoples could have achieved such heat without machine, as we have no record of them possessing ancient objects that behave like modern technology, devices and structures that sit uncomfortably in museums, forcing historians to either label them outliers or quietly ignore the unsettling possibility that ancient people had access to knowledge far beyond what traditional timelines allow. But history says humans weren't advanced then. That early civilizations were primitive, slow to develop, incapable of complex engineering, yet the artifacts remain stubborn and undeniable, contradicting the neat progression taught in textbooks. Sumerians claimed the Anunnaki brought machines that shone like stars, tools described not in symbolic poetry, but in straightforward language, glowing devices carried by beings who descended from the sky and introduced technologies beyond human comprehension, tools that carved stone like butter, capable of slicing through basalt and granite with a precision modern engineers struggle to replicate, hinted at in legends of temples and megaliths shaped without chisel marks or human-scale effort, devices that measured time and sky movement, instruments said to track cosmic cycles, planetary paths, and astronomical shifts with such accuracy that even now their reconstructed models surprise scholars with their sophistication. Are these artifacts leftovers, fragments of a lost era, remnants of machines once wielded by those sky beings themselves, or perhaps by a human civilization taught, uplifted, or engineered by visitors from beyond? Or proof of an ancient human civilization taught by outsiders? A society whose knowledge was immense yet later collapsed, leaving only mysterious relics that hint at a forgotten partnership between earthbound humans and cosmic teachers. The more we discover, the more these pieces refuse to fit the approved narrative, revealing gaps, contradictions, and impossibilities that demand an explanation beyond the comforting simplicity of ancient people. Were primitive, the less the old story makes sense. forcing us to confront the possibility that our history is not a straight line of progress, but a shattered mirror reflecting only the fragments we were allowed to keep. 10. The Stargate theory. Governments hate the Gate of the Gods in Peru, a monolithic doorway carved into solid rock with no inscriptions, no chambers, and no practical purpose, yet surrounded by legends claiming its surface once shimmered with light. As beings stepped through from another realm, the Abu Simbel doorways in Egypt, massive, perfectly aligned portals carved with such precision that they frame solar events to the exact day, and whose myths speak of gods entering and leaving through doors of the horizon, as if crossing between dimensions. The mysterious Sumerian arches, depicted in cylinder seals as glowing gateways through which the Anunnaki moved effortlessly, portrayed not as flying beings, but as travelers walking between worlds through luminous thresholds. Structures aligned to star systems, arranged so precisely that their orientations match constellations, solstices, and rising points of distant stars, suggesting these gateways were not merely decorative, but intentionally constructed for some celestial function. Legends say gods walked through them, not descended from clouds, not arrived in chariots, but physically walked as if stepping from one location to another through a frame that connected to distant points in space, not flew, not sailed, not appeared in visions, walked as if passing through a doorway whose destination was not another room, but another world entirely, as if stepping through portals. An idea dismissed as myth until modern physics began discussing wormholes, quantum tunnels, and dimensional gateways, concepts that suspiciously resemble descriptions carved by civilizations thousands of years ago. Modern governments restrict access to several sites, cordoning them off with military presence, denying researchers entry, or citing environmental concerns, despite geological studies showing no such hazards exist. Why? Why the secrecy around harmless stone doorways? Unless something beneath or behind them challenges the sanitized version of history agreed upon by institutions worldwide. What's buried beneath these gateways? Hidden chambers, ancient machinery, or traces of energy or materials that do not belong to any known period of human development? And why do ancient texts describe them like technology, as mechanisms, devices, tools used by gods, not symbolic passages, but literal pathways between realms, documented with a clarity that feels less like mythology and more like witness testimony? Not all Anunnaki agreed with each other, a truth whispered through ancient tablets that portray their pantheon, not as a unified council of gods, but as a fractious collection of powerful beings whose ambitions and philosophies diverged sharply across time. Their stories tell of conflict, not metaphorical battles of light and darkness, but physical wars, political disputes, territorial rivalries, ideological clashes that shook early human civilizations and left their echoes embedded in myths around the world. Some wanted to guide humanity, believing that humans should be nurtured, educated, and gradually elevated into a species capable of standing beside their creators, rather than kneeling beneath them. Others wanted to rule humanity, insisting that control, obedience, and fear were necessary to maintain order, treating humans not as potential equals, but as laborers, experiments, all resources to be shaped according to divine will. One faction broke away completely, a dramatic schism described in multiple ancient traditions as a celestial rebellion the moment when certain gods abandoned the old order, declared independence, and carved out their own kingdoms across the earth. These became the gods of rival civilizations, beings who took new names, adopted new symbols, and presented themselves to different cultures as protectors, conquerors, teachers, or tyrants depending on their motives and the people they encountered. Egyptian, Greek, Hindu, same characters, different names. Their identities camouflaged beneath layers of language and culture. Yet their traits remain unmistakably consistent. Storm wielders, sun lords, sea rulers, underworld judges, and wandering sages who carry impossible knowledge. Thunder gods, sky gods, underworld gods. Divine figures who battle across pantheons, whose rivalries shape mythic narratives that mirror political struggles among ancient kingdoms, and suggest these gods once operated as competing factions rather than fictional characters, always fighting, their disputes spilling into human history, inspiring wars, alliances, and monumental constructions that seem strangely timed with celestial events, described in their legends, always manipulating humans, guiding kings, choosing heroes, destroying cities, and bestowing knowledge, selectively steering civilizations like pieces on a cosmic chessboard, each move reflecting deeper conflicts. Within the Anunnaki themselves, is mythology just ancient politics? The public record of celestial elites whose disputes echoed through empires long after they vanished from the earth? Or a record of beings who shaped entire cultures, a fragmented chronicle, part history, part propaganda preserved in stone, myth, and memory, waiting for modern eyes to recognize that these stories may not be symbolic at all, but literal accounts of a forgotten age of contact. Ancient Sumerians believed the Anunnaki would return, not metaphorically, not as spiritual archetypes, but as physical beings who would one day cross the boundary between their realm and ours, just as they did in humanity's earliest ages, not in spirit physically, with bodies, technology, and presence, described with a clarity that leaves little room for interpretation. The gods depart, the gods travel, the gods return when the appointed cycle completes. Their tablets describe cycles, vast astronomical patterns measured over thousands of years, as if their knowledge spanned eras far beyond human lifespans and relied on cosmic rhythms, known only to those who moved between stars. Timelines, precise periods after which the gate reopens, the watchers descend, or the shepherds return to evaluate the progress or the failure of the human experiment. Astronomical windows when the gods walk the earth again, moments when celestial alignments, orbital positions, or cosmic thresholds allow passage between worlds, recorded not as prophecy, but as calendrical fact. Every civilization predicted a similar return, as if each culture preserved a different piece of the same warning, transplanted across continents by those who witnessed the last departure. Maya, Hopi, Hindu, Egyptian, all speaking of cycles, of golden ages and dark ages, of cosmic visitors who come and go across vast spans of time, each pointing toward a future moment. When the pattern repeats, Why do they all point to the same era? Why do ancient calendars, prophecies, and star maps converge around the present age? As though humanity is approaching a threshold long anticipated by ancestors, who understood far more than we give them credit for. And why does modern science now focus on unknown objects entering the solar system? Unidentified interstellar bodies, anomalous trajectories, metallic signatures, and unexplained accelerations phenomena openly discussed by astronomers, yet rarely connected to the ancient warnings that mirror them so closely. Coincidence, a strange alignment of unrelated events and myths that just happen to intersect at this moment in history, or ancient knowledge resurfacing, the reactivation of a cycle written into stone thousands of years ago. A countdown humanity forgot until modern instruments began detecting visitors from beyond our sun. Are we approaching the window they warned us about? Are we stepping into the same cosmic moment that past civilizations awaited with fear, reverence, or anticipation, believing that one day the gods who shaped humanity would return to see what we have become?